To understand what Love Jones did, you have to understand what it was walking into. 1997 was not a banner year for Noir's depiction of black romantic life on screen. The decade had given us brilliant, urgent, politically necessary black cinema. Films that were largely preoccupied, understandably, with survival, with systemic violence, with the collision of blackness and American infrastructure. These were important films, but they were films in which love was rarely at the center. Love was the backdrop against which more pressing crises unfolded. When black romance did appear prominently, it tended to frame love as affliction. The emotional grammar was almost always reactive. Love as the thing that hurts you, that failed you, that you had to recover from. Even the films that were joyful carried a certain defensiveness, as though they needed to justify the pleasure of the theme. Love Jones arrived and said no. What if two black people simply desired each other? What if we filmed that desire with the full weight of the camera's attention, with visual intelligence, with patience? What if we let it be complicated, not because it was traumatic, but because it was human? Hey, sorry to interrupt. I just saw that over 99% of you have not subscribed yet. Please subscribe, it helps the channel. Thank you. Okay, back to the video. Theodore Witcher, the director of Love Jones, was not a seasoned director. This was his feature debut, and yet Love Jones moves with the same confidence of someone who had thought very deeply about what he wanted every frame to say. That confidence is not incidental to the film's achievement. It is the achievement. Let's start with the thing that defines the film almost completely: its pace. Love Jones does not hurry, and the refusal to hurry is not a stylistic quirk. It is the entire argument of the film made visible. The slow burn in cinema is often misunderstood. People mistake that phrase to mean things take a while to happen. But the real cinematic slow burn is architectural, it is constructed. It is a deliberate sequencing of withholding and release, of tension built through accumulation rather than escalation. Most films that attempt this simply delay the plot. Love Jones builds the texture of two people. In the scene at the Sanctuary, a jazz club and a poetry lounge on the south side of Chicago, Darius Lovehall enters and almost completely spots Nina. But the film does not immediately lock them together, it separates them at first. It watches how they exist in this space before they exist in relation to each other. That choice to establish them as two people before they become a couple is the slow burns first structural move. When Darius performs the Blue for Nina, a poem he writes seemingly in real time inspired by seeing her, the camera cuts between his face and hers, but it holds each shot longer than conventional editing would allow. You begin to notice that you are waiting. The film is making you want the cut, and in that one scene, it has already made you emotionally invested in what happened between these two people. This is the craft of it. The slow burn is not passive. It is actively manufacturing desire in the audience the same way it is depicting on screen. You want them to get together not because the story tells you want that, but because the camera's patience has seduced you into it, the same way Darius's poem has seduced Nina into it. The film sustained this architecture across its full runtime. Even once Darius and Nina are together, once they've admitted their feelings, slept together, begun the messy project of being in love, the film refuses to shortcut the complexity of what that looks like. The slow burn does not end when the couple becomes official, it deepens. Because we're now watching people who want each other try to figure out how to be people who are good for each other. And that, the film insists, takes time, requires patience, and cannot be rushed. The slow burn in Love Jones is not about restraint for its own sake, it's about the argument that black love is worthy of cinema's fullest attention. What Witcher understood is that the deliberateness of the piece carried a specific political weight in this context. When you film black people slowly, when you let their faces breathe, when you let silences live between them, you are making a statement. You are saying these people are worth your time. You are saying their interiority matters. You are refusing the compression that so often flattens black characters in mainstream cinema into function rather than feeling. Before we go further into the techniques of the film, we have to talk about where it takes place, the jazz club, the Sanctuary. Because the choice of the Sanctuary, a poetry lounge and jazz club, as the film's primary social word, is itself a significant cultural statement. The dominant social space in black cinema of the early 1990s was the street, the corner, the block. These spaces were coded with a specific set of meaning: danger, community, masculine hierarchy, the threat of violence. These were real spaces, vividly rendered, and the films that used that were doing important documentary and dramatic work. But they were also limiting. They positioned the black social world primarily in terms of its relationship to crisis. The poetry lounge of Love Jones is something else entirely. It is a space of chosen culture, a place people go not because geography has trapped them there, but because they want to be immersed in language, music, ideas. The sanctuary is populated by artists, intellectuals, readers, musicians. It is the south side of Chicago, but it is a version of that world that cinema has almost never bothered to show. The film didn't invent this world, it documented and dramatized it, but by placing it at the center of a narrative about Black romantic life, it did something radical. It said that this intellectual, artistic, deeply literate Black culture was worthy of the full machinery of romantic cinema. The shift from club culture to poetry lounge is not just a settings choice. It changes the entire grammar of how desire is expressed in the film. In the club, attraction is primarily physical, bodies in proximity, alcohol, bass frequencies. But in a poetry lounge, attraction is verbal and intellectual first. Darius's first seduction of Nina is a poem. His first declaration of interest is a piece of language, and this positions the film's entire romantic logic around the idea that what draws these people together is not just physical chemistry but a shared relationship to art, to expression, to the life of the mind. This is a radical repositioning, not because physical desire is absent, it is very much present, but because the intellectual and erotic are placed on equal footing, maybe for the first time in mainstream American film about Black romantic life. The sanctuary also functions architecturally in the film. It is the space where things begin and where they are periodically reset. When Darius and Nina need to find each other again after their estrangements, they return to the sanctuary. It is the constant, the place where their story lives, and the film's visual treatment of it, warm lights, layered sound, and a sense of community in close proximity, makes it feel genuinely utopian. A world that could exist, a world the film implies does exist, just that you haven't been shown before. One of the most technically sophisticated things about Love Jones is its sound design, not its music, though the music is extraordinary, but its approach to ambient texture and silence. The film uses both in ways that are precise, purposeful, and quietly revolutionary. Let's start with silence. In most romantic films, silence is a temporary absence of dialogue, a breath before the next line, a pause during a look. In Love Jones, silence is a structural element. It is something the film builds towards and sits in deliberately, the way a musician uses a rest, not as an absence but as sound. In the morning after scene, after Darius and Nina first slept together, they don't fill the silence with nervous chatter. They don't explain themselves to the audience through expository dialogue. The camera watches them navigate the domestic space of the morning, and there are long stretches where neither of them speak. In that silence, you are doing the emotional work. You are reading their faces, you are interpreting the hesitation in the hand movement, the deliberateness of avoiding eye contact, the sudden vulnerability of the first morning together. The silence is where the scene lives. This approach to silence is connected to the film's commitment to slow burn. Silence requires that the audience be patient, that they trust the film is giving them something even when no one is speaking. Most Hollywood films are terrified of this. They fill every moment because they don't trust the audience to stay engaged without stimulus. Love Jones trusts his audience completely. The Rain operates differently, but with equal intentionality. Love Jones has several rain scenes, and in each of them, the rain is doing specific emotional work. It is not set dressing, it is not atmosphere for atmosphere's sake. It is a visual and sonic correlative of the emotional state of the characters in that moment. There is a scene where Nina is on a fire escape during the rain, and the sound of the rain, the texture of it, the whiteness of it, seem to insulate her from the world, to create a kind of privacy and emotional envelope. When Darius arrives in that scene, the rain makes their conversation feel like it exists outside of ordinary time. The rain is a parenthesis. Everything said inside it feels more true than things said in ordinary light and silence. This is sophisticated meteorological cinema, weather as emotional architecture. You find it in European art cinema. What's significant is that Witcher is applying this grammar to a specifically Black romantic story on an independent budget in a genre where that kind of visual intelligence was almost never deployed. Chicago is not just the backdrop of Love Jones, it is an active sonic presence. You hear the city, the distant traffic, the specific acoustics of a Southside apartment, the sound of the L train. These sounds are mixed into the film, not as an accident, but as decision. They build a world that feels lived in, specific, real, and they create a sensory context in which characters' emotions seem grounded and plausible rather than floating in the frictionless air of a Hollywood set. Rain in Love Jones is never decoration, it is permission. Permission for characters to say what they cannot say in ordinary weather. If you want a masterclass in film blocking, study the kitchen scenes in Love Jones. Study them slowly, study them without sound. Because what they demonstrate is that the most sophisticated dialogue in the film is happening in the geometry of where people stand, how they move, what they do with their hands when they are trying not to say what they feel. Blocking, for those that are unfamiliar with the term, is the choreography of actors in a scene, how they move between positions, how their bodies relate to each other, and to the open space they share. It is one of the most fundamental tools of the director. It is also one of the most undervalued. When it is done, you don't notice it consciously, you just feel the emotional truth of the scene. When it is done brilliantly, it becomes the scene's primary language. Watch how Darius moves in the kitchen when Nina is there. He is never quite still. He makes small adjustments, shifts his weight, reaches past her for something, stands slightly too close for the task at hand. None of this is accidental. These micro movements are the vocabulary of someone who is physically aware of another person in a way that they haven't quite admitted to themselves yet. The blocking makes the desire visible before the dialogue acknowledges it. And Nina's response to this proximity are equally precise. She doesn't move away when he comes close. She just adjusts her body almost imperceptibly towards him. There is a gap between what the dialogue is doing and what the bodies are doing. That gap is where the film lives. This is a hidden geometry of intimacy, a visual language that the film develops and then uses consistently. There are patterns you learn to read. When the characters face each other directly, they are in a moment of emotional honesty, even conflict. When they are parallel, both nominally doing something else, they are in a mode of acknowledged but not admitted feeling. When one is behind the other, when the camera shows you a face over a shoulder, you are watching the moment before a declaration that hasn't happened yet. The kitchen is the perfect space for this because of its dual nature. It is the most domestic of rooms, the room of sustenance, routine, the ordinary business of being alive. But it is also, in this sense, a charged erotic space. The collision of the quotidian and the charge is exactly the emotional register that Love Jones operates in throughout. This is not the grand gesture cinema of a Hollywood romance. It is the small moment cinema of how people actually fall in love in ordinary spaces, doing ordinary things, feeling extraordinary things. Okay, that's it for me on this one. Tell me about your favorite scenes from Love Jones. I'll see you in the comments.